Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. Everybody hear me okay in the back? Yes? No? Yes? Excellent. So my name is Rob Wormald. I am what's called a developer programs engineer on the Angular team at Google. So DPE is kind of half a software engineer and half of a developer advocate. So I kind of have the best of both worlds, thank you, Manu. Meaning that I get to be an engineer when I want to and when it suits me, and when I don't, I get to come and do awesome things like this and travel the world and kind of get to be a JavaScript celebrity, which is pretty fun, right? So, number one, thank you to everybody from the NG India crowd for getting this organized. This is the first time I've been to India. My wife is extremely mad because she's been here 10 times and she's been begging me for 10 years, please can we go to India? And then I said, yeah, but I'm going next week for work, sorry. So I'm going to stay a little while, but I'm sure I'll be back here sometime later in the year. So I'm on the Angular core team. I've been on the Angular core team almost exactly 4 years as of tomorrow. I started the NGRX project a long time ago. I don't really run NGRX anymore. I think probably the smartest thing I ever did as a web developer was handing NGRX over to Mike and Brandon, who run it today. They've done a fantastic job. I'm just like the spiritual leader now of NGRX. I don't write any code, but I get some of the credit, which is nice. I work on web standards for Angular. So I worked on the Angular Elements project. I spent a lot of time collaborating with Chrome, talking about new web standards, talking to other web browser teams about what's coming in the browser and what we need, as a framework team. And you can follow me on Twitter if you don't already. That's my Twitter handle. That's the same handle everywhere. So Twitter and LinkedIn, you can find me on all of those things, GitHub as well. So of course, I'm here to talk about Ivy, which is what we've all been doing for the past 2 years. I kind of struggled to come up with a topic or a title for this talk. I'm just going to call it like Ivy, if you can bear with me on that. So sort of why did we do Ivy? It's not a great pun, I realize, but we'll go with it. So we thought about Ivy, we started thinking about Ivy nearly 2.5 years ago. And this was kind of 2 years after we'd started the Angular 2 rewrite. And we wanted to solve some of the problems that we'd seen arise in the Angular community with Angular apps over that first couple of years. So we kind of broke it down into very simple buckets. The first is we wanted it to be smaller, right? Big Angular applications back in the day could be very, very large, and obviously every version of Angular, we've improved that kind of incrementally. Ivy is another big step in that direction. So that was a big focus. We wanted to make it smaller. We wanted to make it faster as well. And faster is kind of a strange term when you talk about the web, because you could mean faster to start up, faster runtime, faster change detection. There's a number of different ways to think about that. Faster builds as well. So that was an important characteristic, thinking about how to make the development experience faster and also the user experience faster. We wanted to make it simpler as well. Everybody who uses this framework knows that it's not the simplest framework out there. We know that as well. That's not a secret to us. Angular is built for some very specific reasons, and I think a lot of those reasons still apply. But when you're building something as you're going down the highway, you make decisions, and some of those decisions are not always going to be correct when you look back at them. So Ivy was really a chance for us to think about what have we done, how well have we done, what are we missing, what's not working out for us, and try to evaluate some of those changes. And of course, we wanted to do this in a backwards compatible way, right? We made this promise to you when we screwed up everybody's apps the first time. Remember, we went from AngularJS to Angular. That made a lot of people very, very mad, and I think rightly so. It was something that we felt we needed to do, and I think I would still defend that decision today, but it was hugely disruptive, right? Everybody in this room, I think, would agree that it was very, very disruptive. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we did to solve those first 3 problems, we maintained that backwards compatibility, right? So how did we kind of do this? This has been the biggest project that we've worked on since we restarted the Angular 2 thing. And this is a 2-year effort from us, tens of thousands of lines of code, huge changes. It's been a really, really big thing, and it's also been the hardest thing that I think anybody in our team has ever worked on, right? And to be perfectly honest with you, I think that we underestimated that in a lot of ways, right? We had some very great ideas early on, and some very, very clear things that we wanted to do, but the reality is when you have 1 million people using your framework, they're using it in ways that you may not anticipate. We don't understand every use case, right? There are things in the framework, a number of things, we discovered that we didn't actually know how they worked, which may be surprising to you. But you have these behaviors that sort of come out of the way these applications work that were never designed, right? So Ivy was about looking at what's the correct way for these things to work? How should they work? Can we simplify them? But that's a very, very hard thing to do while maintaining that backwards compatibility guarantee, right? And that's the thing that's always, always driving us. That's it. It's 2 years of work. not just from our team, but from the community, our contributors, everybody who contributes to the Angular project, everybody in this room who's listening and has given us feedback, all the speakers here who are going to talk about Ivy. It's really a culmination of all of the efforts of all of those different people. So this is the headline. This is the thing that everybody wanted to know about up front. This is a big win for us. This is just general size improvements with 0 lines of code changes, 0 effort on your part. Every application that goes up to 9.0 from 8.0 should see some improvement to their bundle sizes with no lines of code changes, right? No net work from you. What we've seen kind of across the feedback that we've gotten is that the largest apps at the end, and some of our apps at Google are huge, have some pretty significant savings, up to 40%, which is, in some cases, megabytes and megabytes of code, and that's a big deal. And at the other end, smaller apps are seeing big wins as well, and a lot of this is to do with the way that we've designed Ivy to be tree shakeable, so that we can remove all of the dead code that you're not using. So kind of small apps and big apps see the biggest gains. In the middle, they're not seeing kind of huge gains in the way that these applications are changing their size. Again, it's still an improvement, and we think that at the big end, this is where we're seeing the most problems at that like really large scale applications. So we're pretty happy with the improvements here. It's faster in a lot of different ways. So the first thing, and this is a big one that everybody complained about, unit tests for most people run 40 to 50% faster. And this is a big win for your development cycle. This allows you to work much faster, get your job done quicker. Similarly, the AOT compiler now is the default. For a long time, we had this world, we had 2 different kind of modes of Angular. We had the JIT mode and the AOT mode. Those 2 things were confusing. It took a lot of tooling to make that work. And really, the only reason that we had those 2 things was we could not make the AOT compiler fast enough to work in your day-to-day job. With Ivy, it's now fast enough, and our plan will be to move everything to AOT, everything by AOT by default, and for most new apps, that's what we're seeing already. Production builds are anywhere from 10 to 50% faster, so this is a big improvement. Localized builds, so if you're doing a localization in your application, it's much, much faster to actually do the localization steps. And of course, there's a bunch of runtime kind of speed improvements all over the framework. We track this at work with a bunch of very, very cool dashboards. They're not very pretty for a bunch of software engineers, but they are very functional. So I won't dive too deeply into these, but you can see generally we're tracking a bunch of different metrics, things like how long does it take to create a very complicated tree, how long does it take to update that tree, how long does it take to create a large table. And you can poke around this when I share my slides out, but in some cases you'll see the numbers get better with Ivy, and in some cases the numbers get slightly worse with Ivy, and a lot of that's just dependent on the situation, the use case, how you're using it. All of our testing shows that for most applications, every application is either the same or better. There have been very, very few regressions in terms of performance. One thing that I wanted to zoom in on here for you, so one of the things that took kind of unexpectedly long time for us to get right in Ivy was the styling engine. So that's ng class and style bindings and all of that magic that you're using in templates to make styles and CSS classes work. That was one of those places where we found a lot of really undefined behavior. And so cases where you've got host attributes coming in from components, attributes being set from the outside world, classes being set in one place, styles being set in another place. There were no real rules as to how that worked. Ivy now defines those rules, makes them much more concrete. And of course, we did a lot of work to make the style performance better, and there's a huge win in a lot of the performance work here. It also removes the need, eventually, for things like ng class. That's just part of the framework now. So in a lot of cases, we're simplifying, we're making these things lighter, and improving performance as we do that. It's easier in a lot of ways, and this is, I think, where we see the most potential, but you probably in the outside world will not see the most impact today. Angular can be hard to use, we know this. Ivy doesn't solve this problem yet. Ivy is designed to solve this problem, and I think when you've seen people from the Angular team give talks, and I think Martina's talk this afternoon is going to show some of these new, much simpler APIs, some of these very basic component-focused APIs for Ivy. These are going to be very, very exciting in the future. We expect between kind of 10 and 11 is when we'll get these new APIs out to the world. They're not likely going to change how you write your applications that exist today. They may, though, and in my world, they will open up a number of different ways to use Angular, right? So other use cases, smaller use cases, shareable components, widgets, all of these different things. Ivy really gives us the freedom to do almost whatever we want with Angular, and that's the kind of the biggest win there. So in summary, it kind of lays the groundwork for what we're going to do with Angular in the future. There's a bunch of cool new stuff even along, so there's cool new debugging APIs. I think Martina's going to demo this for you, so I'm not going to do that. Much better error messages. If you've ever looked at a zone error message, they can be a little bit troublesome to read sometimes. So Ivy gets much better error messages, which is a big win. Including just like formatting on error messages, right? Making them a little bit easier to read as you're scanning them. So color highlighting. These are just little tweaks that really improve the experience for people, really make it easier to understand what the hell is going on when you see an error like this, right? Just to make a point here, errors are a great place to contribute. One of the problems with writing a framework is you sit and you stare at the framework all day long. So I know all of the gory details about Angular, but the problem with that is I forget what it's like to see an error like that without knowing what it means, right? We have very, very warped perspectives as people who work on the framework. So people who are new to Angular, people who are not comfortable with Angular, when you see an error message that makes you go like, what the hell? It's useful for us to know about that, right? It's a good place for you to jump in and say, there's a better way to explain this. It makes more sense to me like this. And we welcome those kind of contributions. And it's a great place to start for a first PR to Angular. Make an error message better. Explain a little better. Try to explain it from the perspective of a developer. Improve type checking. So this is a big one that we did a lot of work in Ivy for, to make sure your templates are that much more strict. In a lot of ways, I think it was in TypeScript 2 point something, they added the strict flag, which really locks down TypeScript, so you have to use it properly. We added a very similar flag to the Angular compiler, which does a strict templates option. So it has a bunch of different kind of things you can turn off and on. But in general, this is designed to make your templates that much more strict, make sure you're using them properly, which obviously allows us to do better error checking, better type checking for you, all of these things, right? So these are just incremental improvements. They don't change your day-to-day workflow, but they do improve, I think, your application in aggregate. A couple of the notable things to mention. So there's some DI improvements, some new capabilities with different injectable options, so being able to put things into the platform injector or any injector. Most people won't need these, but they do make some very complicated cases much simpler. This one's a really nice one. Raise your hand again if you weren't writing unit tests. OK, so I think fair enough. Unit tests in Angular can be difficult to set up, especially when you're testing components and templates, right? You get the test bed and all of that stuff. These new component harnesses are designed to dramatically simplify testing Angular components. We're already using them on Angular Material and the Angular CDK. They're also designed, you can see at the bottom here, for third-party component authors. So if you're the kind of team that maintains your own component library or you're building your own, which is shared across your organization, you can definitely take advantage of these component harnesses to simplify the testing, right? It takes a little bit of work on your end, but it means everybody who's consuming those components can test them significantly easier. A couple of new components as well. So we've got the YouTube player and the Google Maps player. These have been asked for a long time. I think we're going to have a talk about those later in the day, near the end of the day, so worth checking out there. These are just things that people have asked us for, and they were easy to do, so we went and shipped them. Another big one, which I just really, really love, is we've completely reworked the IDE and the language services. This is just one of these amazing features that Angular really enables. I think it's super cool to be able to do this. In a lot of cases, people were really excited about this, but it didn't really keep up, and so we did a lot of work with the TypeScript team to make sure we had the right APIs to make this work. And now it's significantly faster, way more reliable. And so if you haven't used the language service plugins in a while, definitely check them out. We had some big improvements in Universal. We're aligning Universal with the rest of the framework. Obviously, it works with Ivy. There's some cool new stuff for things like build time pre-rendering. So we're able to take snapshots of every single page of your application and ship them out. If you haven't looked at the Scully project is kind of built on top of this idea. It is very much like a Gatsby or a Jamstack kind of static sites generator. So that's the Gatsby project, and worth checking out. Just a couple of other things to mention here. So lots of small API behavior changes, right? So this is that, actually, Kara put this really well at a talk a couple of months ago. She described Ivy as an audit, which is like not very exciting, but it's really what you need to do. So we audited a lot of Angular's APIs, figured out where things didn't make sense, where things were not consistent, and really tried to make those things much more consistent. Just by the default and kind of changing the framework out, we fixed a lot of outstanding bugs. There's an asterisk there because the reality is we've done a bad job of looking at your bugs while we've been fixing Ivy, right? So one of the things that we're going to focus on in the next version, and Monty's going to talk a lot about this, is how we're going to go back to fixing your bugs that are not related directly to the framework, enabling those features that you want. That's the focus that we're now going to switch back to. I mentioned the style and the class binding work. We did a bunch of work there. Simplified some things. You don't need to use entry components anymore. I'll give you $10 if you can explain what entry components are for. Come and find me afterwards. It's not worth it. Runtime I18 foundation work. So we completely reworked the I18N system. We ran out of time, quite frankly, to do some of the runtime, really flexible I18N stuff we wanted to do. That's still going to come down the pipeline, and again, all of the work that we've done in this I18N overhaul will allow us to do much more flexible, much more dynamic I18N cases. So rather than having to build 15 different copies of your application, right, you'll be able to build one copy of your application and load the locales into it, which is a much better way of doing things. Things like being able to mix and match AOT and JIT compiled code. Generally, there's just a huge amount of improvements under the hood in Ivy. Progress, we've seen a bunch of teams picking it up already. Raise your hand if you're using Angular Ivy 9.0 already. Okay, raise your hand if you're on 8.0 and you're scared to maybe go up to 9.0. More hands came up for that one? Yeah, cool. So I will show you some of the feedback we've gotten. I want to talk about this. But in general, I just want to be clear that our goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to upgrade. It should not be something you have to think about. It should not be something you have to spend a week of time doing, right? It should be something you can come in the morning, start your coffee, start your upgrade, and go back and get your coffee when your upgrade's done. Right? So we do this with ng update. Ng update is the command that will automatically update the Angular app for you. This is the only way we can do what we do. Remember, of course, that if you have libraries that you write, you can write your own ng update commands. So that means you can ship something like ngrx and have it actually fix itself as you upgrade the version. So if you're not using that, worth looking into. Just for some proof for those of you who don't believe me, and you can go and show these to your boss when you get home from work tomorrow and say, this is what we're doing. So we got a bunch of tweets like this. In general, right, everything is good here, 15% smaller, it's twice as fast to build. We love this. I went from 8.2 to v9. It went down by 31% with no effort on my part, which we like. The whole app decreased by 11 megabytes. 11 megabytes is like $27 worth of data, right? That's like real stuff. You can see their app, just everything got better on the application. It cut their application in half. This one I really like as well. They did update Angular CLI core, did it, and it took a couple of minutes, and again, 17% smaller application, 22% smaller ES5, big wins there. This one as well, this is one that if you've used Angular Universal before, it was kind of kludgy in a lot of ways to try to sort of build a bundle and all of this. Universal's dramatically improved, it's got live reload, it's got all of the things you expect, so we've got good feedback on that. This is that static site generation here, so this is a really cool stat. He's generating 10,000 pages in 75 seconds, like less than a tenth of a page per second. This is just the Ivy architecture allowing everything to be much faster, much lighter weight. And again, very simple, no work on his part. We did a live event where he kind of had people, and we did a little bit like this, and we talked about what's coming in Ivy. Tons of really good feedback on this one. I just wanted to call this comment out because I thought it was really funny. Ivy will be the most popular baby name of 2020. Please don't name your child Ivy. Please don't do that. This one here, and this is a company called Dick's Sporting Goods. They are one of our biggest kind of e-commerce, public-facing websites out in the world. They're a lot they're just a big sporting goods company. And so they've worked with us for 2 or 3 years. And we got this email from them that, they got the notification that Ivy was ready at 4 o'clock, and they had it done and in production shipped on their site, which 1 million people were hitting 10 minutes later in 30 minutes, which is pretty awesome, right? And that is a huge, real-world, business-facing, very revenue-generating kind of application. And if it goes down, they lose money. And it didn't go down. Everything's up and running, and everything's better. So we love this. Just a pro tip. I do this all the time. We have this command, this dry run flag that you can add to ng update. This is really useful. I just mentioned this. If it's like Thursday afternoon, it's kind of 3 o'clock, and you're like, should I do the upgrade? Should I maybe not do the upgrade, right? This is a really good way to just see, is this going to run really quickly, or is this going to ruin my whole day, right? So just run the dry run. It won't change your application. It will sort of test it out. It will go through the steps, and it will let you know, is this going to work, or if it's not. If this goes through, just run the upgrade, go home, you look like a hero. If it doesn't, maybe do a little bit more planning and don't start it at like 4 o'clock on a Friday, right? A couple of future things. So version 10.0, we are still doing the planning for that. I think there's a planning meeting probably as I'm standing here talking to you. We are planning on kind of what's going to be on there. The areas that we know we want to focus on for 10.0, and that would be out in kind of June, July timeframe. Definitely cleaning up your GitHub issues and your PRs and getting a better handle on that. Monty's going to talk some about that in a little bit here. Cleaning up after Ivy, we added some technical debt, we made some decisions, so we have a little bit of cleanup to do ourselves. We want to prep to remove all of the old Vue engine code, so all the code that exists from the old engine, we'll pull that out. More MDC components will be coming down, and better CLI defaults, and hopefully some work on elements, which I'll talk about in a second. So version 11, tentatively, we don't know much about that. We expect that to be November, December, kind of in that 6-month time frame. The things we know we want to do there is completely remove the old Vue engine code, and of course that will increase further code savings. Begin to ship Ivy library support, so we're not doing this ngcc thing, we're just shipping Ivy code out to NPM. And then also unlocking the potential of Ivy. So this is beginning to use those new APIs that Martina's going to talk about this afternoon and really get a feel for how they work. Elements, I don't want to talk about this today. I wish that I could talk about this. This is something that I have been thinking about a lot for the past 6 months or so as Ivy's been developing. I have some really, really cool stuff that I'm just about ready to demo. I haven't gotten it approved yet, so I'm not going to get up here on stage and say, here's all this cool stuff you're getting. Hopefully by ngconf, I'll be able to talk about that. The long and short of this is that I want to deliver all of the things that everybody who's talked to me about Angular elements wants. And that's everything from the 4 kilobyte hello world, baby portable Angular elements, all the way up to big applications like Angular I/O. So normally this is where I would go and I would show you a bunch of really cool new ideas that I have, a bunch of stuff that I've been thinking about for the past 6 months or so, talking about RxJS maybe, or NGRX, because I worked on that, or maybe talking about Angular elements. The great thing is that there are people at this conference who are going to do a much better job at talking about all of those things than I would. So for a change, I'm going to talk about something which I don't often talk about, and that's kind of how I got here, and why I think Angular, or I guess why I got into Angular, how I think about Angular, how I learned Angular, and kind of why I use it in general. So I saw this quote on the NG India website, and I really, really like it. Because it's not something like our mission is to create perfect developers, or it's our mission is to create developers who write perfect unit tests every single time, right? The mission here is to create job-ready developers. And I think that, for me, really, really resonates, because that's not the same as creating software engineers, right? It's creating people who are going to do work and be very productive, ship code, and that's where I came from. So how did I get here up on this stage talking to all of you? The secret is I never, ever thought I was going to write code. I am 37 years old now, and I did not look at a line of code, did not think about it until I was 28, right? 27. And this is because when I went through college, there was nothing fun. There were no apps, there was no App Store, there was no iOS, right? Like, software was boring. It was really not something that I wanted to do. But I've always loved solving problems. So kind of, I'm going to just, wow. Every job that I've ever had has been a problem-solving job. So my first job was a Mac genius at the Apple Store, the guy you can come up to and give your iPhone when it broke. That's what I used to do. And every job that I've done has been something like that, helping people solve problems. And to me, that's just what development is. Development is just problem-solving. So find a problem to solve. And let me just tell you, there's never a perfect solution. We hear this question all the time. What's the perfect way to build an Angular app? What's the right way to build an Angular app? There's no such thing. That's a secret. There's just no such thing. Angular is a great example of this, right? We give you all the tools, we give some opinions, but you can't use Angular for every single thing. You have to discover for your own how you want to use it, how it's going to fit into your app. There is always, there's nearly always a good enough solution. That is, you don't have to do the perfect thing, you have to do the thing that solves the problem, that gets your job done, that gets you home at the end of the day. And for me, I think you'll learn more from struggling to solve a real-world problem than any number of books or courses or courseware or any of these things, right? You learn how to be a good developer building applications. You'll probably get it wrong the first time, and in that spirit, we've gotten it wrong a bunch of times, right? We've rewritten the Angular compiler 4 times in the 4 years I've worked on the project. So this is normal that you're going to get it wrong. You'll learn, you'll improve. This is something that I've never, ever, ever shown in public, probably because I was embarrassed about it. But I'm going to show it to you because I want you to see, this is, like I said, less than 10 years ago. This is my first app, and I want to show you kind of where it came from. So I worked at an oil and gas firm, right? Oil and gas manufacturing. I did mechanical engineering in college. I actually dropped out of mechanical engineering in college, but I ended up working for an oil and gas firm. And so they're a manufacturing shop, right? Big machines, welders, all of this. And this is how they're tracking time, right? Doing hourly tracking on their projects. And you can see there's actually two things here. The first one is the original device. And that thing's from like 1982. And this is literally, you have a piece of paper, you walk up, you punch the thing, right? And it goes ka-chunk, and you put it in. So this is literally how we used to do timekeeping. And this is 200 people in a shop, clocking in and out 15 times a day. And what comes out of this is an Excel spreadsheet. And it's somebody's job to take this Excel spreadsheet from Excel, literally walk across the shop, sit down at another computer, and take all of the things that they've taken from this Excel spreadsheet and key them into QuickBooks. Who's used QuickBooks out there? Anybody? No? No? A couple of people? Cool. QuickBooks is a big accounting software. It's like SOAP, XML, it's hard, right? So this is my first app. This is an application that was written in JavaScript, and all it does is allows people to walk up, and rather than using that paper punch card machine, they walk up, they clock in on the machine, it tracks in a database, and then at some point later, it synchronizes it to QuickBooks. Right? This is not sexy. This is not cool. This is not good for conference talks. This is not all that fascinating. But it saved people hundreds of hours a week. Right? It really meant people in the office did not have to move all this stuff manually, and it meant that every time they got it wrong, every time they mistransposed a number, they didn't have to do all this manually, right? And I'm going to show you how bad this app is, because it's really bad. So this is a demo that somebody shot for me on it. Like, he pushes and, oh, it's just, I hate looking at it, right? It's such a slow application. It does everything wrong. It's not accessible, right? Like, the color scheme is terrible. It's ugly. But it worked. It worked, and it solved this huge problem. Stop that. Just look at the input latency. Like, this is just embarrassing for me to show you this application, right? But it is a real-world, real application. It's not perfect in any way. It's probably not even good. As I said, it uses all these texts. Who's used SOAP before? Anybody use SOAP? I'm sorry, right? It's awful. XML, QuickBooks, Node.js. So this is like an unholy marriage of some really old legacy tech and some really shiny stuff, right? It turned out pretty cool. There were no tests. So, you know, I'm up here preaching about writing tests, writing tests, writing tests. There were no tests in this application. There's still no tests in this application. I didn't know how to write tests at that time. Testing was literally me going to QuickBooks, running a bunch of manual stuff. It's not a good way to do things. But again, it's still the most useful application that I've ever built as a software developer. And I've worked now on Angular for 5 years. Still done nothing better than this. So my advice here is understand what problem you're trying to solve. And for me, this was staring at this person who spent their entire life copying from column A to column B, right? That's all they did. They hated their job. And when I got this to work for her, I could go up and say, look, it's a one-button click thing, and now you can go have your lunch, right? You can go home and see your family earlier. Everybody gets paid on time. All of these things are really based on this one little problem that I was trying to solve. And why, right? For me, the why is the most important thing. I try to remind myself every day on Angular, my job is to not make you build the perfect application. It's not to build the shiniest application. It's to help you do your job, go home, see your family, right? We don't want to be software developers just because we're software developers. We're paying for our lives. We have families, right? Angular is a means to an end. It's a means to get work done. So figure out why and then figure out how. We get this question all the time. How should I learn Angular, right? Well, we could say go do a course. We could give you a certification from the Angular team. The answer for me is you don't need to know everything about Angular, and so use it to solve a problem, right? Use it to actually solve a real-world problem. And what that means is go find the problem first, and then go decide how you're going to use Angular, right? Don't go pick up Angular and then go look for a problem to solve, because it may not be the right tool. So again, you don't need to know everything about Angular. Technically, that's my job, and I actually don't, so don't worry about it. You're never going to know everything about Angular. There's nobody in this room, myself included, who explains how Zone.js could work, right? You don't need to know that. It's not part of your responsibility. So again, you don't need to know about anything about Angular to start solving these problems. Just find the problem first. Why are you doing this? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then it's very, very easy to get to the right way to use Angular to solve that problem. Just to be clear, so I wrote NGRX. This is this big thing that everybody's using. We have like a conference at the end of the year. It's amazing what NGRX has become. I wrote NGRX because I knew nothing about RxJS, and I knew nothing about Redux. Literally nothing about them. And so here I am trying to go, well, I've just learned promises. Why are you going to take promises away from me? I know how promises work, right? So I figured, okay, maybe I should, before I post any more on Twitter about this, I should maybe go learn what the hell I'm talking about, right? So I spent a weekend, quite literally, with RxJS on one side, and basically the Redux egghead videos on the other side, right? Just replaying Dan Abramov's Redux thing again and again and again. But I did this because, again, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, at this point, I'm literally 2 screens open, the same tutorials y'all are reading, going, I have no idea what the hell this is, I don't know how they're supposed to fit together. And it wasn't until I went back and I looked at that application, that really, really ugly application I just showed you, and it had this problem, like every major application ends up having, is that managing state becomes very difficult. How do I get on? NGRX was just the solution to those problems, right? I didn't get up and say, I'm going to write the most popular Angular open source library that everybody's going to use. There was no desire to do that, right? It was, I have a problem. I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to use these tools. Let me see if I can solve it. For me, asking for help was the thing that I was scared to do at first, right? And if you go back and look at my history, I have something like 4,000 plunkers. Who's used Plunker before? Have you used Plunker? Plunker was like the pre-StackBlitz. Who's using StackBlitz? So it was just an online playground. And for me, I sat in our IRC channel, and I sat in our Gitter channel nowadays, and I practiced Angular by helping others solve their problems. They'd come to IRC, and they'd go, well, I'm doing this, and I have no idea how to do it. And the first 6 months, neither did I, right? I'd sit there quietly in the chat room and not say anything, but I'd pull up Plunker, and I'd try to solve the problem. I'd try to figure it out. And by doing that, eventually I got comfortable enough to actually start paying it forward, right? So once I learned how to actually do these things, then I sat in that channel, and I started answering people's questions. To me, that's paying it forward. And again, the best way for me to learn these things is to become an expert by helping people, by solving real-world problems, right? Not taking tests for the sake of it. Actually solving people's problems, helping them solve the problems, is what turned me into an expert on Angular, I think. Share what you learned. So for me, again, this is the most important thing. The only reason that I'm able to stand up here today is because thousands of people before me learned, shared, wrote tutorials, or wrote blog posts, or wrote documentation. The only way this works for everybody is if you share what you're learning, right? So again, figure out what you want to do, figure out how to do it, learn it, help other people do it, and then really try to share that information out. And this is the best way to become a senior developer, right? Senior developers are people who help. You made the joke a little earlier about 10x developers. A 10x developer, to me, a 10x developer is somebody who can help 10 people, right? You will never be able to write enough lines of code to be a 10x developer. It's just not possible. But instead of spending that time writing code and you help 10 other people or 100 other people, you're now a 100x developer, right? And that is the way to do that. It's not going to be how awesome of a rock star you are. I'm on this team because I helped people, because I learned to help, right? And when I help, people want to help back, and that's how communities work. So that's my advice there. Thanks for listening. I'm going to hand it over to Manu next, I think. Manu's going to talk about some of the more kind of Angular operational stuff and how to work with our team a little bit better. I love this stuff, clearly. Please come and see me afterwards if you want to chat, you have questions, whatever. I'll be here all day. Come and get a selfie, come and chat. Happy to do that. And again, thank you for listening to me.